Thank you for joining me for this HMIS training session on housing movement date. Housing movement date. The significance. The intent of this field is to document the date that a household admitted into a housing project moves into housing and physically occupies the unit. When the client stopped being homeless and became housed. Please consider that transitional housing is not considered a house project or program. It is still in the temporary realm. Consider overlapping and missing move-in dates causes errors in our federal reports and decreases our reliability on our data for the system. And it also impedes tracking the client's progress. Two other key elements, missing move-in date errors. This can show that they were never housed. The other piece, overlapping move-in date errors, this is when someone is showing as having a move-in date, but also either an active enrollment in a shelter or transitional program or another housing program during that same period. Overlapping errors create ambiguous data, which is unreliable, since someone can physically only occupy one space at a time. Some HUD guidance. HUD defines housing move-in date as the date the household is physically located in the unit. This is reported data for HIC and PIC annual accounts. When to enter a housing move-in date. Unless a client is coming into your program permanently housed, enter the housing move-in date in an interim update. Please note, do not replace the housing move-in date that has been recorded prior to interim for those who have been housed. Rather, update the address info along with any district changes at interim. Rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing programs may result in an exit if the client goes back into homelessness. If they come back into the program and are housed, they will get a new entry and a new housing move-in date. So taking a look at the entry exit tab and going down to the UDE assessments, while scrolling through the middle of the assessment, I found myself at the permanent housing entry. So two things are very important for these entries. The permanent housing is only relevant for permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, or other permanent housing. Other things to consider, hover text. The head of household for all permanent projects, the date the client moved into permanent housing. This may be the same date as the project start if the client moves into permanent housing on the date they were accepted into the program. Please note for RRH projects, a housing move-in date will be entered regardless of the funding source and whether the project is providing rental assistance. Another note, for PSH projects, if the client is housed by another project, the client should be exited from the program to appropriate destination. A housing move-in date should not be recorded in this case. The location of the housing move-in date. Also note, select the Maricopa County city or region the client moved into permanently housed. This applies to PSH and RRH projects only. I'd like to close this out with a handful of FAQs for housing move-in dates. What happens when the client is moving from one PSH building to another PSH building? We would exit the client from the first building, enter a new program enrollment for the new building. The program start date for the new program and the move-in date will be the same, the date they moved in. Is the move-in date the same as the lease date? Sometimes it can be, but sometimes not. HUD defines move-in date as the date the household is physically located in the unit. What happens if the household never moves into housing? In some situations, the household never moves into housing. This may be more common with RRH. In those cases, do not enter a move-in date and you will exit the client from the program. What should I do if the move-in date I want to enter is during a shelter enrollment? Contact the program who enrolled the client to find out if they can double check their records and update as necessary to avoid any overlapping enrollment. What happens if the client loses their housing and then finds a new unit? This can happen with RRH programs, when a lease situation doesn't work out. If there were no days in homelessness in between the two units, no data entry requirement is needed. If the client lost housing and became homeless, you will exit the client with the accurate exit destination and then create a new program enrollment. Never delete a move-in date already captured in HMIS. You will exit the client from the program, create a new enrollment, and then record the new move-in date.